When the girl muttered with a smile that they were indeed following them, the maid asked if they were being lured, hearing a positive answer. The future Duchess muttered that if these impudent fellows who hurt her heart followed into that dark alley, they would be punished. The white-haired youth shouted again that they would not ignore the insults of the nobility, and therefore were only waiting for humble apologies. Aurora thought boredly about how predictable they were, then folded her arms across her chest and asked what would happen otherwise. Pointing his index finger at them, the blonde stranger declared that if they didn't get an explanation, the maid would be next. Angela muttered sarcastically that she was very scared, and the pink-haired girl noticed that the impudent men were threatening her favorite maid. Clenching a stone in his fist, the young man ordered her to shut up because she did not dare call them impudent, and then decided to challenge the girl to a duel. After Angela and her mistress began whispering about this, the nobleman ordered them to stop and tried to hit the girl, but was caught. The fair-haired stranger wheezed loudly, but did not even have time to scream when he felt the future Duchess's tenacious fingers on his collar. The pink-haired girl threw him to the floor with sudden ease, not paying attention to the serious harm it could cause to his health. Lying on his back on the cold and dirty street tiles, the impudent man began to scream about the pain in his back, and Aurora asked who would be next. None of the young men dared to break away and escape by running away, but none of them intended to become a punching bag. As soon as the leader managed to get up and limp after them, all three of them took off when they encountered the wrath of this girl. Dusting her hands, the future Duchess wondered if they had learned their lesson, and Angela clapped her hands in silent admiration. Sir Campbell turned, and his mistress followed him, when someone apparently unfamiliar began calling to her, waving his hands. The peasant, a poorly dressed young man with dark blue hair, enthusiastically asked if she was really the Duke's bride. After hearing the girl's confirmation and the question of why he was worried, the stranger suddenly beamed with joy and declared that he liked her. The pink-haired girl muttered that he must just be crazy, and her escort asked if he needed to deal with it. Later, the girl asked if this peasant had heard rumors that she was planning an engagement to take revenge on the nobility by receiving consent. The dark-haired man stated that the local children loved the lady very much and would be delighted with this meeting, and the future Duchess was surprised by this. He wondered why the Duke had said nothing when he learned that his bride was a commoner, and then asked if the girl would be thrown out. The pink-haired girl muttered with a grin that she didn't know for sure, and the young man replied that they should trust Ettica because he was amazing. Knowing the past from which her fiancé had managed to build a great present, Aurora cautiously asked if he knew Geoffrey. Pressing his palm to his chest, the new acquaintance declared with delight that everyone understood that he was cool because he was a commoner and became a duke. When he added that the Duke had been taking care of them, ordinary citizens, for a long time, the girl asked if there was help from the nobles, and the young man hesitated. Rubbing the back of his head slightly, the peasant replied that they were helping, because even such help was better than nothing at all, and the girl frowned. The pink-haired girl remembered with confusion how all the noblewomen boasted about their charity when the young man said that they were there. He told the kids that he was back, and two little kids, a girl and a boy, immediately rushed forward, shouting that Johnny was back. The dark-haired man asked them to guess who he had brought, but the children froze in confusion, only quietly muttering that this lady was very beautiful. Pointing to the future Duchess, Johnny said that this was the same Miss Aurora, and the little girl said with delight that she looked like a princess. The blonde boy objected that the lady looked like a fairy, and the little commoners immediately became engrossed in their little argument. A freckled woman with her red hair pulled back asked what the noise was about, then froze in surprise when she saw the noblewoman. The dark-haired youth seemed frightened and quickly waved his hands, explaining that it was only Miss Aurora, and Pepper asked if she was Edic's wife. The peasant woman asked the young man sullenly if he really believed the ubiquitous rumors and brought her here, and Johnny was at a loss for an answer. Pepper's freckled face looked confused and displeased when she heard that the children were happy to see Miss Aurora. Once inside, the woman said that she didn't like it when the nobility had to look at them like animals, and Johnny said again that the guest was like them. The pink-haired girl apologized for the inconvenience of her arrival, and then stated that she came simply to ask a question, and not to stare. She looked at the peasant woman, explaining that she had no intention of mocking or laughing, and would simply leave here, asking only one question. Immediately softening a little after these sincere words, Pepper agreed, and asked what question she should answer. The girl clarified why they did not like the work of noble ladies, because the Duke was also preparing a charity project, and she was collecting information. The redhead thought and answered that everything was simple, and they didn't like them, because they decided to disrupt the usual way of life in these slums. Explaining, Pepper said that not all of them were born here. Many became victims of their master and fled the war to the capital. Their resettlement ended with the fact that almost all people simply could not find jobs and automatically became peasants. Aurora listened in surprise that the nobility knew everything and continued to mock them so as not to suddenly enrich the people of another ruler. Pepper added that because of this, food is not distributed equally, and within the slums, divisions have been made into groups, which simply looks like a circus. The redhead stated that if they wanted to help them just out of boredom, then it would be better to refrain from doing so, and she did not trust Duke Ettica. The pink-haired girl remained silent when she heard that he was profiting from poor people and also constantly monitoring them to keep them in check. Johnny wiped away the sweat that had come from excitement as the woman said that they didn't need pity and pathetic crumbs, and they weren't so easy to buy. Aurora was silent for a moment, realizing that she would not be able to convince the exhausted woman of anything, and simply muttered that she would remember this. As they all emerged from the house again, a little boy playing in the yard turned around and asked if Miss Aurora was leaving so early. The kid then asked if Pepper had already told him everything, and the girl added that she was a cool magician, asking if she had shown magic. The pink-haired girl asked in surprise what magic meant, and Pepper shook her head, slapping her forehead and sighing loudly. Turning around, the future Duchess asked the woman if she really was a magician, and all she could do was appeal to God. After hearing from Johnny that Pepper was an unregistered mage, Aurora asked if this wasn't a rare occurrence, and why not fix it. The girl froze and opened her eyes wide, because her interlocutor answered in a very unexpected tone that she could not do this because of poverty. The woman explained that many of the people here, like her, were born with a little mana, but it didn't matter. Pepper added that in order to use this magic, one must study it, as well as learn a special ancient language, mathematics, and other sciences. Aurora thought that in the coming war, every magician would count, and asked if no one knew about her magical powers. Folding her arms across her chest, the redhead responded with a denial and muttered that she didn't even know that they could be taught anything. The pink-haired girl asked why, and Pepper replied that often commoners are unteachable, and besides, if they don't work for nobles, they don't need it. The future Duchess seriously thought about how many problems in the Empire were simply ignored by those in power and influence. As she said goodbye to the children, Aurora thought that she had not fully realized the difference between the classes, since she had only known commoners from among her servants. Already on the way home, the girl stopped and mentally called herself to be honest, thinking that in fact, she was not interested in other people's lives either. Already in her estate, the pink-haired girl walked in a manner that was not at all befitting of a lady, grumbling that her back and stomach hurt a lot from the long journeys. With her hands on her stomach, the future Duchess sat up straight as she heard Lady Rubiana say that she had been expecting her return. The blonde, who suddenly stood in front of her in a yellow dress and smiled, said that she had been absent for a long time, even very long. Aurora wearily asked if the Duke's daughter had really come when no one was home, and she asked, offended, what that meant. Looking at her outfit, the bride Ettica said that her dress was familiar, adding that exactly the same one hung in her personal wardrobe. Rubiana tried to justify herself by saying that it was just the same design, and the pink-haired girl asked where she bought such an outfit. She added that it was very energy-consuming to constantly order a dress to be made, and she would buy a ready-made one, and the Duke's daughter said that she was not obliged to say anything. Aurora asked the lady if she would tell her the truth if they became friends for a moment, and she jumped up like a wounded cat. The tired girl said that Rubiana could do as she wanted, and she would go, and began to turn around to go down the stairs. Clearly feeling how much irritation this man was causing her, the pink-haired girl openly said that it was time for her to leave too. As the future Duchess was about to leave again, she froze when Ruby screamed that she couldn't believe she had just heard such a proposal. The blonde stated that the class difference was an uphill battle, and someone of Aurora's status simply could not be the Duke's wife. Stopping on the steps, the girl calmly said that, in that case, they didn't have to get married and they could just date. The Duke's daughter screamed, asking what kind of nonsense this was and what to do with Edic's pedigree, and Aurora replied that this was her fiancé's problem, but not hers. Ruby stated that the girl would soon be thrown out anyway, since he had a choice in the form of sweet Miss Julia, and then asked how long this farce would last. The pink-haired girl thanked her for her concern, adding that Geoffrey loved beautiful women with volume in the right places. Rubiana was once again thinking of something to create a new twist to this quarrel, and Aurora sighed loudly, wondering what she might hear this time. The girl said that if that was all, then the guest could leave, because she was in a hurry to take care of her women's affairs, and she was surprised. The Duke's daughter awkwardly muttered that she should have explained this to her earlier, but the future Duchess ignored this, saying that she was not seeing her guest off. A little later, the girl was already lying in her bed, curled up into a ball, wondering why the cramps were so strong. Feeling the cold sweat on her face, the pink-haired girl thought that in that case, her reaction to the fight with Jeffrey was absolutely not surprising. There was a knock at the door, and then the man told the bride that he was coming in, but she could barely lift her head from the bed to look at him. The blonde man was clearly worried as he scanned the girl for damage, and even seemed out of breath as he ran here. The Duke stepped towards her and said that he had heard about her condition, and Aurora thought that it was all about Angela, although she asked her to be silent for a while. Jeffrey muttered that his fiancée looked terrible and that they should call a doctor, but she moved away when he wanted to take her hand. She replied with a disgruntled sigh that she was just on her period, and the man seemed to be stunned for a few moments by a feeling of slight awkwardness. The girl muttered that she was tired of the pain, and the blonde man put his hand on her forehead, saying that this happened every month, but she was not that tormented. The pink-haired girl began to enjoy his touch, but then she blushed brightly and quietly asked him to wait. Jeffrey thought his touch had only made things worse and quickly pulled his hand back, but Aurora whispered that it was better to leave it. The Duke again gently ran his fingers over his bride's forehead, and she calmed down a little, thinking that he could help her even in something like this. The blonde man quietly remarked that it felt like he had managed to at least prevent her pain a little, and that was a very good thing. The man asked how the girl was feeling, and she just looked at him with her cheeks reddened, either from the temperature or from embarrassment. Aurora suddenly, quite unexpectedly, rose from her seat and pulled her fiancé by the wrist, exhaling loudly and asking him to come to her. She asked the man for forgiveness in a crumpled voice and laid him on the bed, hugging him with her arms and legs so that she could finally get some rest. Jeffrey could hardly keep up with the girl's changing moods, and therefore looked confused, like a teenager. The pink-haired girl suddenly stood up and asked him to spread his legs, declaring that it was not enough, and the Duke was literally dumbfounded. When the gist of the request finally dawned on Ettic, and he spread his knees slightly, Aurora fell on top of him and exhaled loudly in relief. The blonde could hardly believe what was happening, and he was only a little more surprised by how commanding she was when she wanted something. Also hugging the girl and tenderly massaging the back of her head with his fingers, Jeffrey quietly asked if it was better this way, and the girl agreed. Clearly not having much control over her emotions, the pink-haired girl raised her head, showing her flushed cheeks, and asked him to make peace. The Duke asked her if she agreed to this, and the girl answered with a bright yes, and she felt so good that the pain had receded. Aurora asked if she could come for his touch when their contract was up, but only as long as he was single. Ettica, who was simply melting from such almost cat-like behavior of the girl, was silent for quite a long time, and then with a smile declared that it was possible. Snuggling closer to his chest, the pink-haired girl whispered that it was just perfect, then closed her eyes and thanked him. A little later, when the room was completely dark, Aurora moaned, realizing that she was lying on his arm, and they both fell asleep like that. It seemed that Jeffrey was not in the most comfortable position, but he still slept very soundly, immediately hugging the girl with his other arm. The girl blushed and thought that she could lie like that for now, and then she involuntarily caught herself thinking that even his muscles were beautiful. She ran her fingers over them and thought that the man had obviously trained a lot and had also participated in battles and wars. The pink-haired girl froze when Ettica suddenly turned to her in a soft whisper and asked if she really liked his body. The girl quickly moved her palms away from her fiancé and asked for forgiveness, but he only hugged her tighter and asked what she was apologizing for. Aurora whispered sheepishly that she had touched him without permission, although she had no secret intentions and was simply admiring him. Holding his bride to his chest, the man muttered that she could use his body as she wished, and she asked if he talked in his sleep. The pink-haired girl asked what would happen if she asked for something strange, and the blonde-haired one asked what it could be. She muttered that she could ask him to chop 1,000 pieces of wood with his own hands, and the blonde man whispered with a smile that she was a liar. Allowing the girl to move away after a little resistance, the Duke gently objected and stated that she was thinking of something completely different. After chatting for a bit, they sat down on the bed, and, answering her fiancé's question, Aurora explained that she felt this way when she was tired or nervous. Jeffrey listened to his bride and muttered that everything that happened, in that case, was his fault, and asked for forgiveness. The pink-haired girl said that it was okay, because in the end he helped her, and the man asked if everything would be okay with her now. The girl thoughtfully scratched her cheek with her finger and said that the pain usually lasts for a day or two, and then everything won't be so bad. She added that she was almost in a normal condition, and the blonde man asked if she was really still in pain. The Duke said he could stay with her until the pain passed, as she did, but Aurora replied that the worst was over, and he did not need to try so hard. Jeffrey asked, confused, if his fiancée wanted him there, and she shook her head, saying that was not the case. The girl reminded him that he had a meeting planned, and she did not want to burden him, and the man fell silent thoughtfully. Ettica said he doesn't mistake the desire to ease someone's pain for a burden, adding that the girl's health is more important than the meeting. The pink-haired girl asked if he should focus on negotiations these days, and the Duke assured her that he would do as he wished. Putting her hand to her chest, Aurora looked at her fiancé and quietly asked if it was possible that in that case she would just go with him. She saw the look on his face and asked what was wrong, and the blonde man said he wasn't going to force a sick man to work. The girl asked if she could just sit quietly nearby, because she was very curious about how such negotiations were carried out. Jeffrey smiled a little and asked if she was really going to just sit there and not interfere with how the conversations were going. Aurora, who was worried about Jeffrey, smiled happily, even blushing a little in anticipation, and agreed with his words. Nodding several times in agreement, the fair-haired man said that in that case, he would allow his bride to be his personal secretary. Ettica noted that all this would only be possible if she put on the ring, and the pink-haired girl looked at him in surprise. The girl asked if he was talking about the fake ring, and then added that she could wear it, but she didn't understand what the point was. She immediately assumed that the man wanted to spread rumors, and then said that she had visited Adele and that rumors of an engagement had not yet started. Aurora asked with a smile if this would be the perfect opportunity to plant rumors, and Jeffrey vaguely agreed with such thoughts. Immediately remembering something, the girl muttered that Sir Campbell would give his lordship a list of names, and he clarified why this was necessary. The bride said that today she was followed by 3 unknown guys, and the security guard wrote down their names in order to check everything later. It seemed that the blonde man's mood immediately changed. He seemed much more thoughtful and serious, immediately agreeing to this. The next day, the future married couple met with Prince John at the Imperial Palace, and they exchanged greetings. As soon as the brown-haired man addressed Aurora simply by her first name, Jeffrey blocked his bride with his shoulder and asked what such an address meant. The doors opened before them, and when the prince asked what the Duke had in mind in bringing the girl here, he replied that she would be his secretary. Ettica looked at him sullenly and turned to His Majesty and asked what he was thinking when he arbitrarily called his bride by name. John claimed that he had permission from the lady to do this, but the pink-haired girl thought gloomily about the fact that she had only given her consent for one time. The fair-haired man hugged the bride and said that they should first sit down because the girl was not feeling well today, and the prince offered her to sit down. Aurora hastened to answer the men that she only had a slight cold, so there was nothing terrible about what was happening. Shaitan replied that he had no idea what Ettica was thinking when he brought her along, and that she should not overexert herself, and she thanked him for that. Distracting them both from such a conversation, Jeffrey calmly stated that since everyone was gathered here, it was time for them to begin negotiations. The Duke recalled yesterday's discussion and asked who would take on the responsibility of performing the marriage between Geokir and Nodelberg. Having placed the documents on the table, the blonde man immediately calmly replied that they did not have any suitable candidates, and Aurora looked at him. The girl immediately picked up the papers to immerse herself in the context of what was happening, because before that, she simply had not had such an opportunity. She read about reducing the number of enemies, strengthening Geokir with the help of the Ettica Guild, and the marriage was supposed to be a cover. The pink-haired girl raised her head and thought that this was exactly what they were working on, because since everything needed to be hidden, Geokir would be the last bastion. As she put the papers down, the bride intervened in the conversation and said that she thought it was really a pretty good and working method. Aurora asked if she understood correctly that they needed to conclude this marriage, and then everything would go like clockwork, and Jeffrey agreed. Turning to Prince Jean, the Duke's bride remembered his words about how no one in the kingdom cared about status, asking about it. Shaitan replied that there were no restrictions, because his delegation included both men and women, and each of them was ready to do anything for the cause. The girl nodded and continued to sort through the papers, and the engagement ring with a precious purple stone sparkled pleasantly on her hand. Pretending not to have noticed anything of the sort, such a clear sign, The prince added that he felt the same about this matter as all his men. Jeffrey asked what their deadline was, and Jean replied that they would remain in the Empire until the summer ball, and would wait until then for an answer. The Duke folded his hands together and nodded, calmly stating that they would try to find a suitable candidate for the mission during this time. Later, in a spacious corridor, someone stopped Duke Ettica, who was walking forward with his bride, who was hugging him by the elbow. The girl remembered that it was the Emperor's butler when the man said that His Majesty had prepared a small prize for the Duke. Jeffrey let out a loud sigh, because he clearly didn't like everything that was about to happen, and asked what this surprise meant. The butler said that since Lady Julia deserved a chance, he would take his lordship to the appointed place for the meeting. Putting her hands together, the pink-haired girl calmly said that he should go there, and the man stroked Aurora's back with his palm, looking at her. Jeffrey remained silent when he heard that the Emperor's order could not be contradicted, declaring that he was not at all worried about him and Julia. The blonde man muttered hesitantly that she didn't need to do that, but the girl said that she felt fine and they had been together all day. Gently tugging his strong hand with her tenacious fingers, the pink-haired girl said with a smile that, among other things, she trusted her fiancé. Suddenly leaving a kiss on his hand, Aurora asked the man to bring something tasty, and then wished dear Jeffrey a good day. A little later, already in the courtyard of the mansion, the future Duchess got out of the carriage and saw another woman in front of her, thinking that she did not recognize her. The girl stopped in surprise when a happy Phrenesis, dressed like an aristocrat, suddenly emerged from the vehicle. As the elf approached the girl and left a gentle kiss on the back of her hand, the pink-haired girl noted that he had learned etiquette well. Feeling proud, Aurora declared that practice made perfect, and if he had said he was of noble birth, she would have believed him without question. Phrenesis held up a tablet on which he had written that he had worked hard for the sake of his lady's pride, and she even applauded how much his writing had improved. The future Duchess asked if he would like to go inside and rest a little after the journey, but Angela, who had come out of the mansion, suddenly called out to her. The maid whispered in her mistress's ear that the Rudland girl had visited them again, and Aurora only sighed loudly in response, tired of such visits. Having looked at the guest, the girl advised him to spend a little time in the guest room while she dealt with the uninvited guest. Looking into his pleading eyes, the pink-haired girl said that it wouldn't help him, because it was still very dangerous to show the elf to anyone. Finding her uninvited guest, Aurora said that Julia was not there, and then asked why the Duke's moose had come. The blonde turned around and said that the Duke's bride, although a commoner, should know that guests are not greeted in this way at all. The future Duchess said she did not understand why she had to remain polite in response to insolence, adding that it was time for Ruby to go. Rubiana replied that she was worried that someone jealous might ruin her friend's date, so she came to follow her. The pink-haired girl asked if the girl was talking about herself, and when she flared up, she asked if it wasn't Lady Rudland who was blinded by jealousy. Leaning forward, the blonde screamed that she had tried to remain sweet since she was the Duke's bride, but she had crossed the line. Aurora stroked her chin, wondering how a girl could survive in the cruel world of nobility if such simple things made her angry. Ruby screamed that she didn't dare, but the pink-haired girl suggested that she just tell Jeffrey about her sympathy instead of separating them with Julia. Blushing brightly at the realization that her plan had been discovered, Rubiana screamed that she hadn't meant to do this at all and was just trying to help her poor friend. The future Duchess recalled that she is currently communicating with the same Rubiana Rudland, who always spreads baseless rumors. Aurora calmly said that she knew that the girl was trying to do all this in order to prevent Jeffrey's wedding from taking place. When Ruby asked what that meant, the Duke's fiancé replied that everyone knew Ettica was crazy about her, so they were trying to fix it. The blonde froze and trembled when she heard that she was most likely facing a loveless marriage and was trying to leave the man in the same position. Aurora added that the girl might even hope to one day become at least the Duke's secret lover, and she screamed that she was wrong. The Duke's daughter seemed unable to come up with a single excuse for why she was doing everything this way, and only mumbled. The pink-haired girl stated that in that case, one must act accordingly instead of just saying words, and prove one's case. She pointed her finger towards the exit and declared that Ruby should leave, tired of enduring sudden brazen visits from unwanted guests. A little later, the Duke's daughter did leave. The girl was sitting in her carriage, which was heading to the imperial palace. The blonde looked down and swallowed her tears, repeating over and over in her head her rival's truthful words about how she wanted to act. Blushing with shame, Rubiana muttered that she would never become a mistress, and that this girl didn't even dare to throw such insults. Looking out the window, Lady Rudland suddenly noticed a familiar silhouette there, immediately screaming and demanding that the carriage be stopped. Ruby called Julia's name as she hurried out of the vehicle, and Audrey turned to face her, holding up the hem of her dress. She asked what the girl was doing there and where the Duke was, and the red-haired girl calmly replied that he had gone home. The blonde asked why everything happened so quickly, and her interlocutor replied with a sigh that they simply had nothing to talk about. Rubiana asked again if Audrey had done as she was advised, and then reminded her that she looked much more beautiful when she smiled. Interrupting the endless attacks and questions, the red-haired woman interrupted her interlocutor and asked whether she was really her doll. Rudland blushed with shame, and the girl said she had been given many opportunities for which she was grateful. Julia replied that it was thanks to her efforts that her family was able to move to the capital and meet the Duke himself, but there was one thing. Audrey stated that she could no longer act according to her orders, explaining to her that she was simply not that kind of person. The girl added that she was tired of pretending to be someone she was not, because even in these chic outfits, she was still a simple lady from the suburbs. Nodding at their reflection in one of the windows, the red-haired woman stated that Lady Rubiana was trying to make herself out of her new acquaintance. The blonde blushed when she heard from the girl that she couldn't become like Rudland and didn't even want to do anything for it. She quietly but firmly asked her to stop, and Ruby felt real desperation as she tried to dissuade Audrey, but even her tongue wouldn't obey her. Rubiana said that she was only trying to free Duke Ettica from Aurora so that only the worthy Julia would remain by his side. Standing opposite the lady who was trying to convey an adequate vision of the picture, the blonde wondered if she had always been such an empty shell. While she was lamenting and seemed to be trying to review her whole life, Julia turned to Duke Geoffrey, who was standing outside the window. A few hours ago, the man said he heard Audrey apologize to Aurora, and the girl muttered that they were being overheard. The Duke stated that his bride might have believed it, but he was certainly not one of those who would trust ordinary words after meanness. The man asked if she would be willing to prove her honesty in order to earn his trust, and Julia asked what he was talking about. Folding his arms across his chest, the fair-haired man declared that if the girl agreed to marry the one he indicated, she would be forgiven forever. Geoffrey added that she knew Aurora had been through a lot of hardship in Audrey's family, and she only asked who she should marry. The Duke stated that she only needed to know that the man was from Geocaire, and if she agreed, she would be forced to cut ties with Audrey's family. When he added that if he refused, the consequences could be even more serious, the redhead looked up and asked if it was a threat. The girl thought about the fact that now that she knew that the Duke and Geocaire were somehow connected, her life would be in his hands. After thinking for just a few moments, Julia said she agreed, and the man said that it was indeed the right decision. Leaning forward, Geoffrey said that she had to make him believe in this intention, and Audrey asked how. The fair-haired man asked to drive Lady Rubiana Rudland away from Aurora, because he could not allow her to torment his beloved any longer. Ettica left only after he had seen with his own eyes how the young lady had managed to carry out his order. A little later, Wendell asked if Julia had spoiled his lordship's mood, but he replied that this was absolutely not the case. He remained silent, still remembering Audrey's reaction to how he asked her to drive Rubiana away from his fiancé so that she would no longer torment her with her presence. Then the man froze in surprise when he heard from her that the girl was glad of the fact that the Duke really loved Aurora, and it was obvious. Thinking that he certainly didn't love her, the fair-haired man asked his assistant where his bride was now, having heard about the tea room in Phrenesis. Turning around, Geoffrey asked in surprise if the elf was really here now, and the guy replied that he had arrived at the estate today. A little later, the girl muttered that he could have just sent a letter and then knocked on the door and opened it, immediately bumping into the groom. Later, over dessert, Aurora asked how her date with Julia had gone, immediately asking where they had gone. The blonde man replied that it was not a date at all, but that Prince Jean had recommended the place, and Audrey asked how he knew the ideal place. The girl muttered that Julia had only recently come of age, and the Duke asked what she thought they had been doing that evening.